Kia ora, g'day. The following is a clip that demonstrates good practice in key competency 4.5, which is discuss how family members can support each other and agree on approaches when communicating with the using relative. This is a criteria that many practitioners don't do, or if they try it, they don't do it very well. Take note of how Chris, the practitioner, introduces the criteria to the family member and then identifies the purpose of it by linking it with the stress strain coping support model. Also, observe the core counselling skills that he is displaying. So, the family member is Bob, who is married to Lydia, and their adult son Frank lives at home and he has a gambling problem.
Okay, Bob. So we've completed the social network diagram and a few goals there to take with you in relation to linking in with other people for support. And talking of support, I'd like to go back to the plus and minus with Lydia. Remembering I would have said that one of the parts of the step is looking at agreed communication between family members in relation to your son, Frank.
Mhm.
And going back to the previous step, you were smiling in step 3 when talking about yourself and Lydia's responses and how different they might be. And remembering that there's no kind of right or wrong way of coping, just advantages and disadvantages to each coping response. I'd like to do a little bit more on that to see how yourself and Lydia can be supported more. How does that sound?
Yeah, I think that might be useful. I do remember us talking about that, and it was interesting. And I know that Lydia and I don't always see eye to eye when it comes to dealing with Frank, and that frustrates me a lot. Sometimes I wish she could just see it the way I do, and not just give him money. So yeah, we do clash, and that's not so great.
Okay, I can hear your frustration. Can I ask, have the two of you tried to have this conversation before about how the two of you respond differently?
Yeah, I suppose we have tried these conversations, but generally it's when we're already fighting about how we're responding differently. I've told her that she needs to stop giving him money all the time. It only makes it easier for him to get stoned, and I do find it so frustrating when she agrees with me, but does it anyway, and especially behind my back, thinking I won't find out. I mean, this has caused huge arguments. It's like, why can't she just see she's making it worse?
Okay, so a lot of arguments and a lot of conflict.
Hmm.
Sounds quite difficult. Have you ever tried having the conversation when not fighting?
What do you mean? Kind of bring it up at some other time?
Hmm.
Well, no. I think it's like we both just don't want to rock the boat. Like we're afraid that if we do, we'll just fight again. And I'm afraid that if we keep this up, I might actually lose it.
Okay, you're afraid of losing her.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So you've described her response as kind of being more tolerant, and you've described your own response, familiar response, as more engaging.
Mm.
Um, if you think about how Lydia responds, what do you think could be the advantages of being more tolerant? By example, using that example of giving Frank money when he's badgering either one of you for it.
Well, maybe, I suppose when she gives him money, it actually shuts him up. Ends the argument, gets him out of the house, so we actually have some peace and quiet. The house becomes ours. We give it to ourselves. We're able to do whatever we like and actually not worry about fighting with Frank.
Okay, right. And using that same example, Bob, do you think Lydia might be able to see where you're coming from?
Yeah, I mean, there are times that she agrees with me and she holds firm even when I'm not there. I mean,
Mm.
just last week she said she was feeling really used and frustrated with Frank asking for money, and she was glad. She told me she was glad I'd had it out with him and told him no, and she backed me on that.
Okay. Okay, so it sounds like that you don't always agree, but there's advantages for at different times for different responses.
Yeah, I suppose that is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So let's go a little bit further with that. I wonder what it would be like to actually have a conversation with Lydia about how the two of you communicate with Frank.
Yeah, sounds great. So what do I do?
Okay, all right. Well, I suppose that you've mentioned that you've had conversations before, and they're always in the kind of the middle of the conflict. What do you think about having the conversation when you're actually both calm? Do you think that might make a difference?
Yeah, I think it would. It would make a big difference because, as you said, otherwise it just escalates the argument.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And do you think Lydia would be open to having this conversation with you?
Yeah, yeah. She's as sick of us fighting as I am, so yeah, she would.
Okay, good, good. Okay. So, if it's okay, Bob, can I just check in with you to see if I hear you correctly? You're both stressed in relation to how you communicate differently to Frank at times, and there are times that both of you are quite frustrated at the other's response.
Yeah, yeah, that is about it. And I suppose I'm thinking that if we can at least have a chat about, what's going on, then maybe we might not fight as much about it.
Okay, right, okay. When we think then about talking with Lydia, how do you think you might be able to reach some sort of shared understanding or agreement about the different approaches that each one of you have, and even agreeing to disagree?
So maybe we actually just need to talk about each other's approach and try to understand where the other is coming from, looking at the advantages and disadvantages. And to be honest, I've never actually thought about being able to disagree or agreeing to disagree with each other. So maybe there's something to that we don't always have to do it the same as the other would.
I think that's a great point, Bob. And remembering that you may not always agree because again, there is no particularly right or wrong way. And when you don't agree, it doesn't always need to cause a fight, particularly if you both understand where each other is coming from. And you get that from having talked about it and agreed that there are going to be times where you will have different approaches. I mean, this is a great start. How would you feel about role playing some of this just to see how that might kind of take place for you, or how the conversation might roll out for you?
Well, that sounds good. I think it'd be really good to practice it. What I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, if it's okay, then Bob, we can do this now. If I'm Lydia for just a couple of minutes, I can guess as to maybe some of Lydia's responses based on some of the work that we've done. So how might you start the conversation?
Okay. So, hey, honey. In my counselling, I suppose we're talking a bit about how it could be useful for us to agree on the approaches that we take to communicating with Frank. So how about we sit down and have a calm conversation about how it is we both talk to Frank.
Bob, I'd like that. I admit to being a bit nervous because the last few times we've done this, like we've had huge fights, and it's the last thing that I want.
Yeah, I suppose that's the importance of, if we agree to be calm, and to listen to each other, and we kind of talk about the response or the approach that we take, and try to understand where the other's coming from. And I think perhaps we could, if we can't both agree, that maybe we can agree to disagree.
Okay. Okay. I'd really like to talk about that. I know that sometimes you're kind of angry at me for giving the money to Frank, and I try my best not to do it as often as I used to. Sometimes I just find it so much easier just when he's kind of he's gone and we have a bit of peace, whether it's just me, myself, or the two of us. We're able to watch a bit of telly, like, and the conflict is just gone.
Hmm. And I think I get that, because that's something we talked about in the session, that I kind of get that is kind of the approach that sometimes works.
Mm.
Yeah, and then I suppose I have a different approach as well. And one thing I've realised is that sometimes you agree with my approach, so we don't always agree. We kind of perhaps are some way towards acknowledging why we're doing it differently.
Mm. Okay.
So now we review the evidence for Key Competency 5. There was a good introduction to this criteria by Chris. He set an agenda and identified that the aim was for the family member, for Bob, to feel supported. Chris linked it back to step 3, reiterating the advantages and disadvantages of the different coping responses used by Bob and his wife. He had asked for a specific example of when he tried to communicate with his family member about their approach to their son. He gave the important message that it's okay to agree to disagree on their approaches when communicating with their using relative. It's not just about them agreeing all the time, but understanding where the other is coming from. So the family member then ended up with a strategy of how to talk to his partner about their response to their son, which means that Bob and his wife can feel more supported in how they approach their son. So feeling supported will reduce the family member's stress and strain, and so meet the purpose of the 5-step method. So if we look at the evidence for the core counselling skills, Chris gave the family member plenty of space to talk. He did this by using lots of silences. He acknowledged the emotions throughout, reflecting back the frustration the family member had experienced. He demonstrated excellent listening and summarising. One example being when he said, let me check in to see if I heard you correctly. He asked plenty of open questions with silences followed to allow the family member to answer. He was calm, he was not rushed. He didn't rush to fill in any spaces. And he gave the family member the chance to practice the skills from this core competency. And this made the family member reflect on his situation. And doing so actually gave the family member hope that they could communicate better about their son. So to summarise, this session was very structured. So we know it's really, really important that as practitioners, we control the process and the family member controls the content. So having a structure and having those core counselling skills demonstrated, it creates the conditions in the session which actually allows the family member to explore how he communicates with his wife. Afterwards, the family member, so Bob, actually said that this was a positive session and would come back.